I'm Alan Spears with Occupy Democrats, and in some breaking news, Project 2025 is finally starting to get some mainstream media attention, especially following a recent viral interview that the president of the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts, provided. Now, to briefly recap a very extensive topic that has been covered here on this channel, as well as many others, Project 2025 is essentially a blueprint and a playbook for what Donald Trump's second presidency would look like. Now, despite Trump's recent claims that he has no idea what Project 2025 is or what the Heritage Foundation is, 140 of the authors of Project 2025 are appointees or directly connected with Donald Trump. Project 2025 has a number of different points in it and methods that would further reduce our rights and liberties as individuals. The dissolution of the Department of Education, a nationwide abortion ban, and the installation of Christian values and doctrine into federal government and into education are all just a few aspects of what Project 2025 wants to accomplish. It is a 900-plus page document and guide for Trump to effectively turn this democratic country into an authoritarian Christian nationalist regime. And again, do not take my word for it. We have already had multiple conservatives who are proponents of Project 2025 come out and say they are, in fact, Christian nationalists. They are not hiding it anymore. Now, unfortunately, it would seem that the media recently has been way more focused on President Biden and his age and requesting that he step aside as the Democratic nominee, instead of focusing on the very blueprint that would be the destruction of this country. But where the mainstream media has utterly failed, we will succeed and persevere. Now, as many of you were made aware recently, Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, recently issued a pretty chilling threat to liberals and people on the left. At the tail end of the interview, he said that we were effectively going through a second American Revolution, and that it would remain bloodless if the left allowed it to be. Effectively, what he was saying was that if the left simply just shut up and allowed he and his far-right Christian nationalists to install this utterly terrifying way of governance, we would be safe. We wouldn't be harmed. And it really does always come down to violence with these people, doesn't it? It is always these far-right Christian nationalists that are so obsessed with blood and killing and guns. It's exhausting. But I, for one, will not be going quietly, even if that requires the loss of my life. I will not silently stand by and allow Kevin Roberts or the rest of his goons to install this way of governance, to install Project 2025, or allow Trump to get into the presidency and accomplish all this without a fight. So fighting I shall continue, and that actually brings us into what I wish to show you today in a series of multiple clips. Kevin Roberts gave another interview on The Will Cain Show. The Will Cain Show is an online streaming show that is kind of a subsidiary of Fox, or it's one of their online streaming programs. Don't worry, it's terrible. Now, during this interview, it would seem that Roberts changed his tune a little bit. That chest beating and bloodlust seems to have subsided a little bit as Project 2025 has gotten a bit of notoriety, thanks mostly in part to him threatening bloodshed. And again, just a reminder, this man who claims to be a Christian and support Christian values just threatens bloodshed against the left, over half of the country if he doesn't get his way. How very Christ-like, Kevin. Now, as many of you know, Trump has tried desperately in recent days to try to distance himself from Project 2025, saying he has no idea what it is, he doesn't have any association, and wishes them the best of luck. But in a hilarious turn of events, the very people that Trump is trying to separate himself from, Kevin Roberts and the Heritage Foundation, they go on to Will Cain's show and prove, they contradict Trump's story. And these people are supposed to be his allies? How embarrassing. It is hilarious to see Trump's allies completely undercut him and sabotage him and prove that he is lying in their own words. So take a look for yourself and see in this first clip just the lunacy that is Trump and the Heritage Foundation's alliance.
Over the weekend, Donald Trump has distanced himself from Project 2025. I think I've characterized that perfectly. He said, basically, I don't know who's behind it, whether or not that's true. I doubt that that's true, by the way. And he said, it is not part of my governing agenda. I don't know or have much to do with Project 2025. What do you take away from Donald Trump distancing himself from your project?
Well, first of all, thanks for the question. I think that if you consider that the Biden campaign has spent $15 million on attack ads, obviously primarily on President Trump, our standard bearer this year, but some millions of those have gone against Project 2025 in particular, then if you're running for president and you're trying to win not just any campaign, but what we think at Heritage is the most significant campaign in modern American history, then it makes sense that politically you want to pivot from that. There are no hard feelings from us at Project 2025 or Heritage about that. We love President Trump, and we love President Trump in addition to him personally, but also because his policy record when he was president of the United States is so much better than President Biden's has been. All of that to say that it's also important to remember, as we say all the time, President Trump's the boss. If he wins, he's going to make the decisions. Project 2025 is merely a menu from which he might be able to choose. It has a database of personnel who are willing to go into office and work for him if he so chooses. But one final point that's important is that this is a reflection of grassroots conservatism. It is, regardless of what anyone thinks on the left or the right or the center, the most unified project in the history of the conservative movement, and it's not going anywhere.
You know, I'm actually rather surprised that Roberts was able to articulate himself so well, considering his tongue was all over that boot. Yes, this is about as much of a backpedaling admission as you're going to get from the man. It is clear that Trump, along with Roberts and the rest of these conservatives involved with the project, are recognizing the fallout surrounding public awareness and how terrible this would be for the country. Again, if Donald Trump is trying to distance himself from the project and from Roberts, that really does say something, doesn't it? That really does indicate to me that Trump recognizes that Project 2025 is looming large in the minds of Americans and that a lot of people aren't really too thrilled about it. I mean, Trump's audience is always going to be incredibly loyal and foaming at the mouth for him. There's not going to be anything at this point that the people who love and support him can be shown or anything that can happen that's going to really break that support. But with those fanatics aside, there are still a number of people in the general public that might prefer Trump over Biden, but they're not avid loyalists or fanatical about him, and if they see something like Project 2025 supported, at least openly, by Trump, it may be enough to push them to the other side. Now, in this second clip I'm going to be showing you, Roberts addresses Schedule F, which has also been a major topic of focus within Project 2025. Now, effectively, what Schedule F calls for is the removal of hundreds of thousands, if not quite literally millions, of federal government jobs, and rather than having these people appointed in and having a vast variety of different specialists and people capable of counseling the president, Schedule F would allow select members from Donald Trump's own personal cabinet or people that he could appoint into these key positions and essentially turn them into yes men. And if you're like me and thinking that the presidency is already getting a little too powerful for your own comfort, thanks, of course, due to the Supreme Court and the people that Trump appointed, well, you're not alone. Roberts himself actually agrees on that matter, but for some radically different reasons. Take a look and see what Roberts had to say in this second clip.
There are 2.2 million federal employees. Let's posit that they're all great people. I'm willing to do that because I love fellow Americans. But we then also have to posit that there are too many of them in those jobs. If you go ask that question of average Americans, they will say the same thing, not because they wish any harm against anyone who works for the federal government, but they believe that this concentration of power, which is intensified under the Obama and Biden presidencies, has to come to an end. And so Schedule F is but one vehicle that can happen. It might be that some of these employees are able to retain their jobs and go to offices outside D.C. That would be great. It might be they go to the private sector. It may be that some of these jobs come to an end, all for the more important purpose of saying that until we devolve power from Washington, D.C. back to the American people, we are going to continue to live in a regulatory state that runs roughshod over our rights. In fact, I could take practically every screed that has been issued about Project 2025 and turn it on its head using the same exact language and say, in fact, what the left is arguing is what they're guilty of. And let me just make one prediction for you. We're going to be telling that story between now and Election Day.
don't you just utterly hate and despise these non-stop lies from conservatives like Roberts? The growing concentration of power within the presidency has been because of the fact that the Supreme Court, the justices of whom were appointed by Donald Trump and are horribly corrupt, clearly, they have decided that it's fine for the president to do whatever they want. It's fine so long as it's an official act. They're immune from any sort of ramification. This was not something that President Biden called for or did himself. This was a byproduct of Trump's own justices trying to protect him from being in trouble with the law. If Biden wanted to, he could exercise these new powers as long as he did so in a official capacity. If he thought that, well, this election, it's really unsafe with all of these MAGA lunatics running around in the streets armed and the Nazi marches we've seen through Nashville recently. Hey, these elections aren't safe. Maybe Biden should remain in power. Maybe he should stay in until we can be sure that a fair and balanced election it can be conducted. But of course he's not going to do that because he's not a corrupt, insane villain like Trump. Biden right now has the ability to do pretty much whatever he wants, and we're still seeing the respect and the restraint that a president should show and should demonstrate. I can assure you Trump will show no such regard. I swear to God, if you went to Roberts and said, the earth is round and it revolves around the sun, he would spend the next few years lobbying and going on to these interviews saying the earth is flat and that the sun revolves around us. And on the topic of education, that brings us nicely into the final clip that I want to show you, where Roberts responds to the notion of these yes men being installed in the federal government rather than these experts. They would be advising the president rather than the experts in their field. Now, in this final clip I want to show you, it really doesn't require too much setup or context because Will Cain, to his very slight credit, does posit a pretty decent question about the concerns of having non-experts advising the president on topics they know nothing about. And of course, Robert's answer is about as comical and pathetic as you might expect. So take a look and see for yourself what Roberts has to say about non-experts in any given subject advising the president.
But here's their argument, and I want to give them their best foot forward. Their argument would be, okay, but many of these people, NASA, whatever, they're experts in their field, Kevin. They know what they're doing. And with experience comes expertise. And if you have your way, you'll have people who are answering to non-experts. Whatever. What does President Trump know about NASA, or whatever, physics and astronomy. But their motivation now will be to please the president, and they'll turn into yes men, and they won't be experts pursuing science or the best possible outcome in their field.
To cut to the chase, Will, there will no doubt be agencies. NASA is perhaps an excellent example where something like Schedule F would not have much impact because we need the scientific expertise there. But in other areas, I think about the Department of State. It's the most common complaint that I hear as I travel the world on behalf of American conservatives that the Department of State, our career bureaucrats, maybe perfectly fine people, are not aligned with the political will, the popular will of the American people, because they think that they can just live in these far-flung places and do what they do. But my favorite example as a lifelong educator is something on which President Trump and Project 2025 agree on 100%. So much so that we're following his messaging on this. And that is, we are, if he's elected, I believe, going to be able to begin the elimination of the U.S. Department of Education. There's an example where devolving power from D.C., block granting that money to government-funded schools and districts at the state and local level is going to be excellent. Those people in the Department of Education have very fancy credentials after their name, and they may be perfectly fine people. But we know that after nearly 50 years of spending trillions of dollars on federalized education, the only thing that's happened in spite of their expertise is a steady decline in educational attainment for the first time in the history of this country. So I do think we have to recognize the scientific expertise where it's important, but also recognize another important fact, which is the word expertise is often used to shroud an ideological agenda, knowing that a majority of federal employees who give politically give to the Democrat Party.
And there you have it. What they don't need, or really what they don't want, they're not going to bother with the experts. That is exactly what he was saying. And I do find it so incredibly infuriating when people like Roberts are constantly talking down towards the Department of Education, when conservatives themselves have done endless work to defund it and just utterly destroy it from the inside out. Some of you out there may not be old enough to remember the No Child Left Behind, which was George W. Bush's handiwork, but it was one of the most destructive pieces of legislation to American education this country has ever seen. Effectively, what the No Child Left Behind Act did was make legal consequences for schools that did not meet certain standards in their testing. Now, this threshold was already set incredibly high, and it would continue to increase over the years until, at least in theory, every school had a 100% pass rate. Now, schools that had already been underfunded or defunded previously, they were shit out of luck. They didn't have a chance at hoping to pass these tests in any sort of authentic way. So instead, a ton of teachers started having to teach for the test. Rather than actually educating students on any given topic, they had to basically teach the students the questions and have them memorize the questions. And this meant that even in good schools, if just a handful of students didn't pass these standardized tests, it wouldn't matter how great the other students were. It wouldn't matter if 95% of the school passed, even with like a 100. They still would be penalized. It's also why you see the United States constantly scoring lower in the global education rankings. We don't teach, we don't actually educate. We have standardized tests that teachers are so burnt out from teaching that they are underpaid, underfunded. Naturally, our education is going to slip. But Trump, along with his other conservative allies, they pretty much don't give a shit, and they think this is a good thing. Trump himself says he loves the uneducated, and it's pretty clear why. And look, you do not need a college degree to make you smart or intelligent, and hell, it by no means automatically makes you that way. There are a ton of idiots out there who have college degrees or even doctorates, but the point of the matter is that education gives you this ability to become a more well-rounded individual. It provides you new experiences that can inform more decisions. It can make you just a better, well-rounded human, and taking that away, stripping that away from you, is robbing you of your true and full potential. And while this is more of my opinion, I guess, you should never stop trying to learn. You should never stop trying to educate yourself on new subjects. It's what keeps your brain active and healthy, and you can become so much more of an interesting person. Your life can improve in so many different ways by just learning and reading more. But this is exactly what Kevin Roberts and the rest of these Republicans don't want you to do. They want you to be ill-informed, to be less educated, so that you are more susceptible to misinformation. But to end on a little bit more of an optimistic note, the very fact that Trump is trying to distance himself, he's not, it's very clear he's associated with this, but he's trying to distance himself from Project 2025, and the fact that Roberts is going on to these interviews, and rather than calling for bloodshed and beating his chest, he is trying to explain away what the project is. I think that is ultimately a good sign. There has been a ton of traction in the news, and a lot of people are starting to learn about Project 2025 and the dangers that it presents, but we must keep up the pressure and keep up the fight. If this stuff comes to pass, we're screwed.